Okay, what up, friendos? Welcome back. We're discussing today Nexon and Ironmace and the Dark and Darker lawsuit, things like that, as well as the fact that Nexon have kind of found themselves at the center of even more controversies surrounding games being stolen from them. And I'm saying stolen from them because obviously there's been no actual gone to court and a verdict been handed down as of yet. So the allegations as it stands right now. But there's been another project that popped up that did this essentially the exact same thing as Ironmace is alleged to have done. And there's a load of new information here, basically. And the reason I'm talking about this today is that basically people are looking for an update because this has been going on for a couple of years now. And the update is, in Korea, the case has gone to court. It's continuing to go through the legal process. And as of right now, as you can see here, the verdict is scheduled to be announced at 2 p.m. on October 24th in Korea. So this article is going to go through some of the points that were raised in court. My monitor just turned itself off. Amazing. I don't know why it keeps doing that. New monitor. Amazing. So we're going to go through this. I'm going to, give a little bit of background and details on this because I did follow the case incredibly closely throughout the last, however long it's been going on. And then also go over Project KV, which is a project that sprouted up from yet again another group of people who worked at Nexon who decided, why the fuck are we working at Nexon? Why don't we just go make our own game that's essentially the same game that they already have? But we'll do it and we'll get all the money. And it didn't turn out quite as well as they expected it to. But first up, Nexon versus Ironmace, 3 key points of the century's verdict. I don't know what that means exactly. On the 10th, the 63rd Civil Affairs Department of the Seoul Central District Court held the oral argument for the lawsuit between Nexon and Ironmace for violation of the Unfair Competition Prevention and Trade Secret Protection Act. Previously, Nexon had applied for an injunction to stop the service of Dark and Darker, but the court dismissed the application, saying that the matter should be discussed in the main lawsuit and Dark and Darker is currently being serviced on Steam. So basically what Nexon wanted to do was to say, to prevent further damages occurring, we think the game Dark and Darker shouldn't be able to run. And the court just said no, because obviously by that point, there is no actual verdict being held, right? There's nobody saying, yes, they did do this, so why would the service be prevented from running? It's kind of like anti-competitive, and also would basically prevent Ironmace from raising the funds from operating the service, required to then present a defense to prove whether or not they are actually infringing on this thing or not. So that thing from Nexon was never going to really work, and it's basically just like part and parcel of any kind of lawsuit like this. You just kind of do things hoping that, there's an outside shot, it works, and then you'll have an easier time to win. It's kind of just how the law works. So last April, Nexon filed a lawsuit claiming that Choi Ju-yun, the former head of the P3 development team, currently a director at Ironmace, had stolen the P3 game source code and various data onto his personal server and developed Dark and Darker at Ironmace after leaving the company. Ironmace countered that P3 and Dark and Darker are different games, and that Choi simply developed Dark and Darker by synthesizing mechanisms widely used in previous games, such as the dungeon exploration genre. Basically what happened here, and I don't even think much of this is unproven, was that this guy, Choi, worked at Nexon on an unannounced project called Project P3, and during COVID, basically when everyone was like forced to work from home, he went to the higher ups and said, can I maintain my own service, basically, that's uploading all the work to this server, and then I can use this server to effectively work from home with the team and things. And Nexon originally said, yes, you can do that. And then they got their own service up and running, which everyone in the company at Nexon was using. And they told him specifically, okay, now stop doing that. Stop maintaining your own private server with all of the files on, because obviously that's like a security concern. Even if they weren't worried about him leaving the company or doing nefarious things or selling the code or doing whatever else, it's a data protection and privacy concern for the company. So they told him, stop doing that. He said, okay, I will. and then continued doing it anyway. And then while he was at the company, was taken to disciplinary because he was trying to poach staff and stuff like that, and doing things that they didn't want him to do, obviously, as an employee of the company. And then obviously they found out that he was still maintaining the service, and they fired him. And then they said to him, you know, hand over your service so we can find out what you've done with it, what's been done with those files, what exactly you had, what you did with them after the fact. And he said no and deleted the server, which is a little bit odd. And then obviously he made his own company and started making Dark and Darker, and then within a very, very small period of time, Dark and Darker as a game was like playable in people's hands. Now, there's obviously some points here that people are going to say, oh, you know, we like Dark and Darker, we like Ironmace, and Dark and Darker isn't such a unique concept that the game couldn't have been developed very quickly. But the fact is that the game was similar enough to the game that was being worked on at Nexon that you kind of like, with games that are being made, they go through like an iterative process of, especially at big companies like R&D, and they figure out like what's fun, you know, what should we do here, what should we do there, and then they work on it over and over again, and they eventually get to the point where the game, you know, passes internal play tests and things like that, and they've added on additional elements over and over again, and then it goes into like a real test phase, and they continue developing and maintaining the game. The fact that Dark and Darker came out so quickly means that they kind of skipped a lot of that, which means that common sense would dictate the person who made this very similar game at Nexon and was being paid by Nexon to do so basically bypassed all of the time and money that went into creating this idea and just made the idea again, but obviously for his own company. And that's kind of what the argument is. Now, what's happened during the lawsuit is that a lot of people don't fully understand the actual arguments being made by Nexon, and they just kind of, you know, take individual pieces of information and treat it as if that's like the whole point. I'll give you an example. And obviously people call me like a Nexon shill and a dick rider for Nexon for whatever fucking weird reason, for saying this. But basically at the time when Nexon released their original USA lawsuit, within it they said like, oh, you know, all these files are similar, you know, all these, you know, X thousand files that are the same as the X thousand files that were for P3. And those files were Unreal Engine store assets. So obviously everyone's immediate reaction is, lol, Nexon's so stupid, lol, Nexon are trying to claim that they own Unreal Engine assets, lol, they're so dumb. But that's not what they were doing. What they were saying was, these two projects are supposed to be independent, and how could one be made and have all the same files as the other one being made unless the person making it had information that he'd taken from the other project and recreated it, which is why they're saying, you know, if you could create this game with any of these assets from this store that has tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of assets, why the fuck are all of them the same? You know, why have you just basically remade the game and it looks very similar? Because you've taken, you know, if we needed 10,000 assets for this game and we made it here, and you needed 10,000 assets for this game and made it here, why are they exactly the same? You could only do that if you had the information to know which assets were used in the first place, which obviously he did because he made the game already at that company. So that's the argument. It's not that they think that they own the assets on the asset store. It's the combination of that, as well as the naming schemes, as well as the similarity of what the game is versus what the game at Nexon was. And the short development time span means that I think common sense dictates whether or not legally he's on the hook for this being wrong, whether or not the law decides what he did was unfair competition or stealing of trade secrets or whatever, that he clearly only was able to do this in this short amount of time span with this amount of similarities, specifically because he already worked on this game previously. And that's the crux of the lawsuit. So yeah, let's move on, I guess. The civil suit filed by Nexon was a fierce battle over the substantial similarities between Dark and Darker and Project P3. The verdict is scheduled to be announced at 2 p.m. on October 24th, and we have summarised the 3 main points raised during the arguments. So the first point is substantial similarities between LF, P3, and Dark and Darker. LF, if you don't know, was the original version of P3. P3 being basically Dark and Darker, but from Nexon, what they were working on previously. LF was a single-player version of P3, and again, how this usually goes is we've thought of an idea. Okay, let's develop that idea. Okay, what's it missing? What can we do differently with it? Oh, it's a single player? That's not that fun. Let's do multiplayer. Okay, we've done multiplayer. This is cool. This isn't cool. What can we do differently? And it basically goes through rounds. That's how these big companies operate. Round 1 is the core idea fun. Okay, it's okay, but we can do something different. All right, we'll change it. Round 2. Are we going to move it on? And every time it gets to one, if it fails, they basically pull development from it and move people onto other things and just call it a bad job. It's how R&D usually works at companies like Nexon. So the court said the key part is the similarity or dissimilarity of the works of each party, and that the creativity in the selection and arrangement of game components seems to be the key content, so you can see it clearly only by watching the actual gameplay videos. And then they ordered the 2 companies to submit videos. In response, Nexon and Ironmace argued their case in court through PTs. Plaintiffs claim Nexon invested in the development of LF to P3 and Dark and Darker infringes on the P3 copyright. Nexon's legal representative, Kim and Chang, claimed that Ironmace copied the core game elements and mechanisms of Project P3 that was being developed by Mint Rocket. Mint Rocket, if you don't know, is one of the companies owned by Nexon that they basically intend to release indie games through in order to not be tarnished by the name of Nexon. And that's kind of why you'll notice, if you follow this case closely, a lot of people in the West hate Nexon and just want Ironmace to win because, you know, the little guy taking on the giant and the big corporation that nobody likes that does all the bad monetization things is kind of the story that resonates the most with the West. They're essentially saying, you know, even if Nexon's right, fuck Nexon. You know, we'd rather indie games do this, which is a very short-sighted way of looking at things relating to theft of copyright or infringing on patents or ideas, because obviously if it's okay for small companies to steal from big companies, then logically, if we allowed that to happen, big companies could then steal from little companies and little companies would get fucking wrecked, because if you could just straight lift one-to-one somebody else's game, which one's going to make the game better? A big company with infinite resources or a little company that doesn't have infinite resources? The obvious answer to this is, as consumers, we shouldn't care about patents, so much so as like, you can't play a third-person game because Nintendo owns the patent to third-person games. That's stupid and services us in no way. But obviously, if a person works at a company and then literally takes game files and goes and makes an exact replica of a game that's already being made, the argument and why Korean people are more on the side of Nexon is that that's going to hurt the games industry overall in the long run, which I completely agree with as a sentiment. I have no, you know, warm, fuzzy feelings for Nexon. It's a fucking shit large company that basically exists to extract the maximum value from the IPs that they own. And traditionally, as a company that's ran MMOs and things like that, they're all pay-to-win fucking garbage. But that being said, they have released games like Dave the Diver, which is a smash hit indie game that's developed with Nexon money under a brand that obviously they're trying to use as like, this is our goodwill brand. And when a company then steals a game from that goodwill brand, it obviously incentivizes them to do that less, which is bad when you consider what we've already had from Nexon and Mint Rocket, and how that could, like, you know, make good games for the industry and not be overly monetized and things like that. So that's kind of where the divide is, with Korean industry basically being more behind Nexon and the Western industry being more behind Ironmace. It's kind of just how the splits worked. And as somebody who's read all the files and gone over all the leaks and things like that, I tend to believe that Nexon are probably in the right here, whether or not legally, just morally, I think that they are. Nexon cited similarities in specific gameplay, character classes, and interaction methods as examples. The defense attorney briefly replayed gameplay of L3, P3, and Dark and Darker, and pointed out that LF which was a single-player PvE game developed into P3 through Nexon's R&D process. To summarize the plaintiff's arguments, LF was a game made by 13 developers. It was a single-player game, not a multiplayer game, and it took 8 months to develop. During the interim evaluation process, when looking inside the company, they said, this is not fun enough, so they gave the company input to make it more fun, and that's how many people brainstormed and started making P3. Nexon's argument is that team leader Choi took this P3 and made Dark and Darker. I don't even think that this can be argued, by the way, if you look at the two games side by side. Like, it looks like the same game. Obviously, the graphics are like slightly worse in Dark and Darker to what P3 looked like, but that comes from the fact that it's a company with much more money versus a little indie company. But obviously, like, just the mechanics and everything, the actually what you're doing, it's the same fucking game. It just is. And anyone who says that it isn't is being incredibly disingenuous or fanboying over it. We've all seen the images and the gameplay and everything. It's the same game. And the argument could be, oh, you know, but this guy had the ideas for P3, so him going and making a version of that on his own is actually fine because he had the idea. But obviously, if you work at a company, the ideas that you have that you then sell to the company and they pay you to develop are their ideas. Like, they now own it. And then going and making your own version because you just want more of the money for your blockbuster idea is... It shouldn't be allowed, should it? Because it's not tenable. Like, it's unsustainable for the industry. There are some arguments for, like, oh, you know, but he didn't fully copy it because there's differences now because the game's gone through more development. But obviously the argument is that at the time it was conceived and the time it was released, basically Nexon had spent a whole bunch of money developing this thing for him to just say, you know, fuck it, I'm going to go make my own now, and had a much faster route to success because all the money and time and effort had already gone into, like, hashing out what would work and going through playtests and things like that. So basically he could start a company and do everything in super speed time because he already knew and had done these things and it had already been paid for previously. They also said the defendant is presenting numerous prior games in an attempt to deny the originality of P3, but none of them have original components and organic combinations similar to those of P3. Dark and Darker starts in a tavern, and Nexon explained that this tavern concept existed from the planning stage of P3. They claimed that the planning intention of P3 was, should I go down the floors and get better items, or should I escape because I might not survive? And that Dark and Darker also carried over this planning intention. Nexon said that this was a copyright infringement, citing the following. The Barbarian class has a fun interaction to break down doors, a function, to break down doors, which is also implemented in Dark and Darker. There is a casting motion when opening a box, which is also implemented in Dark and Darker. The fact that light and darkness are set as important elements of the game, so mechanisms such as lighting up dark spaces with torches or not being able to see opponents in the dark were also included. Even if the asset was purchased, the size of the door asset was increased 1.4 times. So, again, the argument isn't that in isolation, because this is something that, again, people get confused. They look at barbarians can knock down doors. That's not copyrightable. Silly Nexon, haha, lol. But the fact that you have to take totality of all the things, put them together and say, on the balance of probability, meaning is it more likely than it is less likely, which is how civil court works. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt like in criminal court, which obviously means that you have to be really sure beyond a reasonable doubt that this thing happened. Balance of probability is it 50.1% more likely to have happened than 49.9% less likely to have happened? And in a case where you have two games where you put them side by side, it's like, this is similar, this is similar, this is similar, and you run through a list and it's a fucking massive list, and it's like things that you wouldn't be able to know if the person didn't already have prior knowledge, and also evidence that they already worked there, and evidence that they had a server where they had all the files uploaded to that they could access from home, and evidence that they were contacting investors, and evidence that they were poaching people from the staff, trying to get them to come and work literally on our version of this game we've already been making. When you put all that together, is it more likely than not that they did so to basically steal this game from Nexon? And the only rational thing I can come to is that, yes, it is more likely that that is the case. Whether or not the court decides that it's actionable is a different matter altogether. But in totality, all of these things combined, like, why did they have these mechanics if he didn't take it from a game that had already been paid for and developed by Nexon? You know, why is it exactly the way that it is? if that's not the case. And that's kind of like the only common sense way to come down to this. Obviously, some people think, oh, why does it matter? We only care that we get a game, and Ironmace would make a better game than Nexon would because Nexon's Nexon, which is, I understand the sentiment, but that's devoid of any kind of relevance to the actual legal case and how you should feel about it with gamers. Because, again, in general, if you thought that way and felt that way, then you'd also have to be consistent in that you wouldn't complain if big companies just went like, oh, RimWorld. Yeah, RimWorld's a cool game. We're just fucking stealing it. But obviously without the additional fact that there was people from that AAA company working at RimWorld and uploading the files to another server, which I think nobody would be okay with if the roles were reversed. So that's kind of where I come down on it. So Nexon also emphasized P3 is a game that was not completely developed and released, but was temporarily suspended due to the defendant's illegal activities. The fact that it was suspended alone is similar enough to be recognized as copyright infringement. So if you don't know, they basically had to abandon development on the game. They say suspended. I don't know if it was indefinitely suspended or not, but they did so because obviously all the main people developing the game left, and they left to go and work at Ironmace. Like, you know, it is what it is. We know that this is the case. So they didn't have the people to continue working on it at the time. And they were just like, yeah, they've also applied for like criminal litigation against this guy and I think another guy at the company, which I think is probably more likely to actually go through and see somebody arrested for it than the civil case is. Just because I think it's inarguable that these things did happen. It's just whether or not a court decides that, like, yeah, it actually matters to the development of the game and we're going to retroactively do something about it. There's also already precedent in Korean courts of people who literally did this exact thing for an MMO back in the day called Terror Online, which, again, somebody stole from, which company was it? NCSoft. And went and made this game, and then they went to prison and was fined a bunch of money. And then, funnily enough, Nexon hired that person, and they're currently the CEO of Nexon Games, which is a subsidiary of Nexon. Defendants claim Dark and Darker is the result of team leader Choi plus reference to previous game. Regarding the substantial similarity between P3 and Dark and Darker, Ironmace's legal representative Lynn defended Dark and Darker by saying the game was created through personally embodied knowledge and prior games. Personally embodied knowledge. Yeah, personally embodied because you worked on the fucking game at Nexon for a while beforehand. Regarding Nexon's influence on the pivot of L3 to P3, he countered, I don't know what parts or the people at Nexon contributed, but there is objective evidence to support the idea and elements that were planned by team leader Choi at the time. Irrelevant, because you worked at the company, so it doesn't matter if they're your ideas, they're the company's ideas now. If somebody's paying you to make something and you say, oh yeah, we should do this, that's the company's idea now. Whether you like it or not, that's just what you sign up for when you work as a creative at a company like this. It just is what it is. You don't own, if you say, oh yeah, we need to have them in pink hats now, the company now owns that thing goes in the game with the pink hats. Like, that's just what it is. Of course, it would be difficult to say that Team Leader Choi created everything from beginning to end, but Team Leader Choi laid out the core ideas and the overall direction. This is kind of like telling on yourself, though, right? If it's like, oh, you could only make this game because you took the ideas from Nexon when you worked there, and you turn around and go, yeah, but I made those ideas. You are just basically admitting to, and there will be some translation issues here with like context and things, so that's probably not exactly the context in which they're saying it. But at the same time, if you just take this at face value, they're basically saying, yeah, but he made the ideas, so why couldn't he go and do it, in a way? Ironmace then introduced a comment from an American user. They're pulling fucking Twitter comments, bro. They're pulling social media comments from Americans. The reason two games are similar is because the genre has been in production for a long time. Has it, though? Before Dark and Darker came out, which game looked like and played like Dark and Darker? Because I don't think there was one, personally. And obviously people didn't really know P3 existed. There was a video showcase at one point, I think, during a Korean game, like Gamescom-esque thing. I can't remember which one it was. Maybe it was G-Star, something like that. But there wasn't any games that looked like this. So this American user who said this is not being very sincere. They also argued, since the assets were purchased from the Unreal Marketplace, there may be some similarities in certain screens, but you should not look at specific still cuts or short moments, but rather compare them in detail to see what the overall personality is to determine the similarity. You should do this. And the fact that, again, they, at the time of when the lawsuit was originally put forth, there was so many assets that were identical. I'd say look at that and be like, why? Why are they so identical? Why are they using so many of the same files in a game that apparently they developed without prior knowledge of? Like, it doesn't make a ton of sense. They also claim that P3 is a battle royale game with magnetic field constraints, but Dark and Darker has time constraints and escape is possible depending on the player's choice. They also stated that P3 can change between first person and third person, but Dark and Darker is basically a first person game following the traditional FPS. Good points, but I would say that obviously this is something that, as the games were and the development iteration, that doesn't detract from like, oh, they're developed in this way because of your prior knowledge, right? Because adding in a third person as well would have been something that would have cost more money and potentially something that would have been taken out of P3 throughout the development process. And again, you can add and remove things, but that doesn't change the fact that the core of what it is fundamentally the same thing as what they're alleging you stole. They also stated that P3 can use fireballs with spell books, but Dark and Darker's magic is bound to the character. P3 had 8 weapons, but Dark and Darker added 74 weapons and unique attack motions. So yeah, they are just basically arguing that we've added more stuff and changed a few things, which, yeah, you can certainly make that argument, but again, it doesn't detract from the fact that the core premise of the game and the foundation of the game and the building of the game to get to that stage is something you probably, allegedly, couldn't do without the prior knowledge of working on the game that was paid for by Nexon, that you took files from and may or may not have used. The defendant's position is that P3 did not have resurrection, a store system, or elements that interfered with attacks by terrain. Same shit. The defendant's attorney argued that P3 has no legal protectable value. Dark and Darker has many features that P3 does not have, and although they share common ideas, P3 is not a released game, so it must be determined whether the claimed infringement is worth protecting. That's funny. So basically, oh, it's not even out, so is it even worth protecting it? Does it even matter that we, allegedly, potentially did steal the game because it's not even released? Is it even really a product, is the argument there. The concepts of dungeon escape and dark fantasy are public domains that anyone can use, and Director Choi combined these ideas to create Dark and Darker. Yeah, at Nexon originally, and then created them again, at Dark and Darker. At Ironmace, rather. The defendants sided with PT, showing sudden attack in Counter-Strike and Kart Rider and Mario Kart. They criticized that Nexon had introduced a similar system to Valve and Nintendo's previous games, so if the plaintiff's claim is true, Nexon has committed copyright infringement multiple times. The classic whataboutism. Okay, so you see this a lot in when people are making arguments about copyright and anything like that. Oh, your argument is this, so what about this? It's the classic whataboutism, but did Nexon employees work at Counter-Strike and then take files and then go make a game that looks identical, plays almost identical, but with more features because it's been developed for longer now and been released for longer and been an actual active product for longer, and was basically the same idea? Because that's what's being argued. It's not that the games are similar, it's that the games are so fucking similar due to the fact of who worked on it, where they worked on it. Like, these are the contextual things that matter. It's not that they're saying, oh, you've made a game that looks like ours. Same with the Pal World thing and the Nintendo thing. They're not arguing, oh, this game looks similar to ours, so therefore you stole it. They're saying, due to all of these things that objectively did happen, you did work there, you did take the files on your own server, you did have a game that used all the same assets that you purchased, which we also used in the exact combination with the changes exactly the same way, using the same character names, using designs that look very similar. Like, that's the argument, not, we had Pokeballs and then you've got balls that you throw that capture things. That's not the argument. It's not like saying, oh, Counter-Strike's first person and Doom is first person, so therefore did Counter-Strike steal Doom? Like, No, that's not the point. They argued that if copyright infringement and other items are judged solely based on the similarity of the atmosphere of the still cuts, there's virtually no game that does not infringe on the rights of previous games. Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it. What was the source code used by Nexon stolen? Initially, Nexon filed a lawsuit pointing out that the source code of P3 was uploaded to the open source platform GitHub on June 30th, 2021, before the disciplinary dismissal of team leader Choi. Nexon's position is that it is possible that the components and arrangement combinations of Dark and Darker were created based on this source code. Ironmace responded, "We can see that the source code was uploaded, but we cannot strictly know whether it was compiled." So that's Ironmace saying that. So they're saying, oh, we see that the source code was uploaded, but was it compiled? We don't know. I mean, you do, because you fucking did or didn't do it. But that's the argument they're making in court. If this source code was used as is, there is a possibility of illegality. So it becomes another issue other than the substantial similarity. This is the second prong of the lawsuit, right? Did you use the code? Because if you did, this can be proven and you're fucked, basically. There's no other argument. We already know objectively, that Ironmace admit it here, we know that the source code was uploaded. They had the source code. He did it repeatedly after being told not to, which is sketchy as fuck, by the way. Even if you come at this from like yeah, I'm on Ironmace's side, fuck Nexon, you can't say that this isn't sketchy as fuck. To be told, don't do that, and then he just goes and does it anyway, and then deletes the server when they ask to see what's on it. That's, I don't know, guys, why would you do that otherwise? Because you could have solved a bunch of headaches if you just said, yeah, here you go then. Like, 1, not do it. 2, not poach the staff and leave. 3, don't then say, oh yeah, you can see it, psych, and then delete all the files, because that's fucking weird. If the source code was used, blah, blah, blah. Nexon claimed that it should be verified that the source code was used to create Dark and Darker, saying, if necessary, we can submit a video reference of the process of extracting GitHub data. Ironmace countered, saying Dark and Darker came from the idea of then team leader Choi. Why? How's that a counter, though? Oh, yeah, we can submit a video showing how you extract GitHub data. Yeah, but the idea came from Choi. What? How's that? What? I don't understand. There's got to be some mistranslation here, because that makes no fucking sense. Unless their defense is just basically like, it doesn't even matter if we use the source code because Choi made it. Which I can't imagine that being the case, because that would be dumb as fuck. On June 30th, the court requested that the team leader Choi prepare and submit materials regarding the relationship between the source code uploaded by the team and the current Dark and Darker build. It doesn't say whether or not that happened, because June 30th, we're quite a ways away from that. Did director Choi contact external investors while working for Nexon / evidence? So this is another big one that came out at the time, and I didn't really see all too much evidence other than Nexon had obviously made these claims and posted some emails, I think it was, that we saw, or they were leaked emails. The plaintiff's attorney argued during the project, Choi continuously contacted external investors and persuaded the team members to go outside and make games. He didn't mean like go and sit outside in the garden. He meant go to a different company, aka I'm going to make a company away from Nexon and go make it. The defendant argued P3 was a project that the plaintiff dropped, and LF was also dropped because it had no marketability. Even after joining P3, since he did not lead the project under the leadership of then Vice President Dae Hwan Kim, they fired him under the pretext of using the external server for his work as a disciplinary action. So let's break this down. So they're saying you contacted other investors and you tried to poach people to go out and make other games. And their argument, aka Ironmace's argument, is that, oh, you dropped P3 and you dropped LF. And even after Choi joined P3, he didn't lead the project. And then they used pretext of the external server to fire him. Which doesn't, again, this is not an argument to what's been said here, at least in my mind. This doesn't make any fucking sense. Like, oh, you did poach people to go make this game. Yeah, but you cancelled it. It's kind of like what's being said. At least if this is an accurate translation, which again, it's probably going to be missing construction of English sentences that would make it make a little bit more sense. And then obviously saying, yeah, but I wasn't the leader because I was under this other guy, and then you fired me. I don't know what that does. The defendants argued, despite the court's order to submit documents regarding Vice President Kim Dae-hwan, they have never submitted the transcript of his disciplinary committee meeting. However, the plaintiffs, aka Nexon, countered in a briefing after the trial that, quote, at the time, Vice President Kim Dae-hwan said he would take responsibility for the matter because it was under his supervision. So he did take some responsibility and he submitted the related documents to the court, and that they submitted all the documents requested by the court. They also added the only person who was disciplined for this incident was Choi. Former Vice President Kim has now left Nexon and founded a game development startup. I don't know what this guy's gone on to do. Maybe it's something to do with the thing we're going to look at in a second, but this is kind of like, it's hard to really understand this part without additional context, because Ironmace is saying you didn't submit the transcript of the disciplinary meeting. Nexon are saying they did, and surely the court would be able to determine whether they did or not. And they're saying they have submitted the documents, so who fucking knows on that one. Nexon sent a statement immediately after trial saying, "We view this case as a serious matter that damages the ecosystem and healthy competitive culture of all content industries based on creation. And we have taken this lawsuit very seriously. We hope that a judgment will be made that properly explains the trade secret infringement, copyright infringement, and theft of works by P3 so that such unfair acts will never be repeated and a fair competitive environment will be guaranteed." Ironmace's side predicted that Ironmace will win the case legally, but also expressed its intention to appeal even if we lose. Okay, so that's where we're at with it, and we're going to find out, unless anything changes, on the 24th of October, which isn't a crazy distance away now. It's a month away, so that's good, because I can't wait to see a resolution on this. Win, lose, or draw, it really matters not to me, other than the fact that, again, I think based on what's been said, what's been shown, it's objectively true that he did do things wrong. It's just whether or not a court decides it's legally actionable, that it's similar enough for them to feel comfortable saying, okay, you did do this thing, and here's what the damages are going to be and what you're going to have to do to make it right. In a lot of cases like this, what happens is, I mean, I'm surprised this didn't go to a settlement in the first place. I don't know how common that is in Korea, but in a lot of cases like this, they'll end up having to pay a bunch of money, potentially sign some kind of like licensing agreement with Nexon for the future of the game. Who fucking knows, really? It's still entirely possible that Ironmace wins in this civil litigation. It's also entirely possible that they win the civil litigation and they lose the criminal litigation and the people responsible for doing this go to prison. That's entirely possible. Or that during that criminal litigation, money is also, what's the word, remunerated? Maybe that's the word, I can't remember, from the project, even if the civil case fails. So who fucking knows at this stage? It's very interesting either way. And then obviously we come to Blue Archive, which is another game by Nexon. It's a mobile game for mobile game players, so it's fuck all to do with anything I've ever done. Never played it, never looked at it. Basically what happened was that I got sent like a massive Google Doc, like a 20-page Google document going through like all the details of this. I read it. I didn't want to make a video at the time going through the whole thing because it's not my alleyway. You know, I'm not getting lost up that one with gacha games and stuff. But basically it was another case of a bunch of people who worked at Nexon, who worked at Blue Archive, decided, why are we working here when this game makes so much money? Why don't we just go make our own version? And they did. They just left. They took a bunch of people from the company and they went and made something that essentially looked identical. They had like even small details that were almost exactly the same as Blue Archive, like halos on the characters, which is just like a random, like these things, which is just a random thing to include when you're literally stealing from another company. Why don't you just not do that and then maybe get away with it and just do what you set out to do and make a game that's like similar enough that you steal from the pool of players and have a successful business, but not similar enough that it's literally spitting in the original company's face so that they sue you into oblivion. But this only happened, basically the context of it is the people who left to go make this new game were being paid more than the CEO of the company. Like, they were being paid handsomely for their work on Blue Archive. They were getting paid crazy money. And they thought that they still weren't getting paid enough despite being the highest paid employees at the company, more than the CEO. And then they went and made their own version. And then, obviously, a couple of weeks ago, it got cancelled. Why did it get cancelled? Well, it's pretty obvious because they were stealing. They were stealing from Nexon, and they probably got a strongly worded letter saying, "Stop doing this, or we're going to sue you," and we will. And you don't have the financial backing to live through that, so you should probably stop. And then they decided, yeah, actually, fuck it, we will. So they were launching the game. So it's another case of like they had a bunch of the game and the assets and stuff made within months, basically, of leaving the company, which again points only to we could only do this because we worked at this game for so long, and we were basically just tracing their work. We were just taking everything we knew about the game and recreating it, and then saying it was this new thing, which obviously you can go work at a company, work on a game. It's like ex-Bungie developers going and making Concord. Do they use the knowledge that they acquired while working at Bungie and working on like Halo and things and Destiny to make Concord? Sure. Does the game look or play or is similar to those games to the point where you could say that they copied the game? No, obviously not. Like, that's the distinction. You can use knowledge you've gained. You can even, like, let's say, for example, Risk of Rain. What's the company called? Like Hoppu or whatever? They made Risk of Rain. They sold Risk of Rain as a franchise to Gearbox. They're now working for Valve. Let's say they release a game similar to Risk of Rain, like in mechanics and everything, but not identical. Are they allowed to do that? Yes, because we've even got precedent for this in Western courts of, like, you know, Defense of the Ancients and Warcraft mod, League of Legends, Dota 2, Heroes of the Storm. They're all games that, like, you can tell they pull from that similar, from the foundation of that original game, but they're different enough, right? They're different enough across the board. They're similar in many ways, but they're different in many ways also. And obviously there's not files being used, there's not like exact designs being used and things like that. That's where the differences are. And it might seem like a bit of a, I don't know, a muddy water or whatever, but I think it's fairly clear if you look at stuff like this that Project P3 and Dark and Darker, they're just so fucking similar, guys. I can't really stress enough how similar these games look. Even all the key art and everything makes the game look like the same game, right? But either way, we'll see what happens. Obviously, we're going to get an answer to this pretty soon, and then we'll have to see what goes on moving forward. I have always been of the opinion, I even own Dark and Darker, by the way. I own it twice, and I bought it for other people, because despite how I feel about, like, oh, I think Nexon's right, I've always said the same thing. I don't want this to be settled. I don't want Nexon to just win because they have more money and the legal case basically just drowns Ironmace. I want whoever wins this to have done so legitimately, because obviously the only way you get answers to questions and find out, you know, who's right and wrong and have context going forward for things that will undoubtedly continue to happen in the industry is for things to reach their logical conclusion. And in a legal system, that means they have to have the money and they have to have the time to present their defense and for a court to say whether or not they're right or wrong and who's right or wrong and in what ways. So I've always maintained that, like, the legal process needs to be followed with this so that we can know. I don't just want Nexon to be like, oh, I think that they're right, so therefore they should win. That makes no sense to how I view things. But obviously I've got a lot of shit from the Dark and Darker community over the years because they think I'm just shilling for Nexon, when I think the idea of just looking at, like, individual components and being like, I like this thing because I want them to win, is just not very useful to the entire thing. And I'd rather my coverage be, whether I'm right or wrong, just what makes sense to me after, you know, reading and doing as much research as I can, speaking to Korean people, going through all the court documents, going through all the communications, all the things that we have available to us, and then coming to a conclusion. But obviously I'm not a lawyer, even if I was not a lawyer in Korea, and this is going to be an interesting one. So we'll wait and see, and I'll let you know as soon as we find anything out. Hopefully there'll be a conclusion to this very, very soon. And until then, Let me know what you think in the comments. Go buy some gamer subs. Go buy some waifu cups. Link in the video description. You can buy some stuff with a 10% discount code. I get a kickback. You get money off. Win-win for everyone. And suggest me content in the comment section, Discord, Twitter, anything like that if you want to see me cover something else. And I'll see you next time. Peace.